things that we were talking about, you know, when we made a truce that night, is that, and this just happened recently, they said, you know what, word is bond. That's what they said, word is bond. They said, if you can man up, and you can man up and keep your word, then we'll keep our word, and there'll be a truce. I want to introduce and bring the senator up with that he's a man that has done all of that and more. But he's also a man who mans up to what he believes. And when you say man up in this community, you think of the senator. And when you say man up, you think of a man who keeps his word. And a man who keeps his word, especially in the political arena today, is a man that you want to trust. Is someone you want to be in their corner because you know he's in your corner. And with that, I would like to bring my friend who mans up, our senator.
Dad were here, we have an expression in our family, I apologize, I have a cold. And from the time we were children, my father would say to the boys, and change the vocabulary slightly for my sister, he'd say, you have to be a man of your word, without your word you're not a man. He'd say to my sister the same thing, you have to be a woman of your word. And folks, I made a promise. In my neighborhood, where we come from, my sister and I were raised in a little steel town called Claremont, Delaware, and right on the Pennsylvania border north of Wilmington, Mr. Mayor. And it was a working class town. And we went through grade school there, and then we moved a little further out and lived in a more of like a typical suburban neighborhood. But we have an expression where we come from, and that is that a promise made is a promise kept. You never break your promises. And I made a promise to myself. It sounds ridiculous to say it that way, but I didn't think of mentioning this in the context of the introduction. Is that, by the way, the reason why Kale likes my son Hunter. My son Hunter's as crazy as he is. My son Hunter graduated from college and came in one day and told his mom and I it's time to pay back. We thought he meant tuition. He ran off and ran a homeless shelter, an emergency service shelter, and lived in a really tough neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, in the African American community. And he's still, it's still where his heart is. I should have raised one kid who wanted to be a millionaire. You know, so when they put me in a home, I got a window with a view, you know what I mean? And my wife said the big problem is they've all heard too many of my speeches. Anyway, all kidding aside, one of the things that I was raised by a man who thought the single greatest sin anyone could commit was to abuse power. The expression my father had from the time we can remember was it takes a small man to hit a small child, and a man never has a right to raise his hand to a woman under any circumstances but self-defense, ever. And because of my passion for this issue, an awful lot of people, particularly the national press, have assumed either my mother was a victim of violence, or my sister, or my daughter, or someone close to me. Fortunately, that has not been the case. But when I spent a lot of my career up to the time I ran for the United States Senate in the African American community in my city as a park director, as a lifeguarding projects, as a public defender. And what I learned was the violence that exists in that community is absolutely no different than the violence that exists in $800,000 homes. The violence that exists in very Tony neighborhoods. The violence that exists goes down to a simple proposition. Our attitude in this country toward women. It's a hereditary deal. Our Western culture for the longest time has not been in a fundamental way different than other cultures. We have thought of and we have laws, we had laws, and we had attitudes that suggest that a woman is property, particularly the property of her husband. A lot of the women in here who work in this area know very well that the expression rule of thumb allegedly comes from a common law decision made in England in the 15th century because so many women were being killed by their husbands, beaten to death. Common law rule emerged, and the man could not beat his wife with a rod if it was any bigger than the circumference of his thumb. In English common law, I see one of my good friends here is one of the first-rate lawyers in the state. In English common law, there was a notion that a woman is a chattel. A woman is actually no different than the farmstead, that you own it. A woman's rights derive totally from the man. In 1988, I thought I had learned all there was to learn about violence in America. I've been the author of every major trial for the last 35 years. Literally, not 30 years, chairman of the Judiciary Committee for many of those years. And I got a report from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and it said that from 1976 to 1985, violence against men in the age range of 18 to 30 had actually declined by about 12%. I thought I knew about violence. I thought it was the equal opportunity employer. But then I found out during that same period, violence against women went up over 50%. So what was wrong? What was happening here? What was the reason for that? So I ended up holding hearings, literally 1,000 hours of hearings, and voluminous records, bringing in criminologists and psychologists and psychiatrists and legal authorities. And it became absolutely clear that the dirty little secret being kept in this nation, above all of the dirty little secrets, was the extent of violence against women in our society. And there was a survey done in the early 80s in Rhode Island, actually mid-80s. And it asked, among other things, young men the following question, and young women, in what they call middle school, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And it said, if a man spends $10 on a woman on a date and wishes to have sex and she refuses, does he have the right to force her to? And astounding, 30% of the young boys said yes. But an equally more astounding to me, 23% of the young girls said yes. 23% of the young girls said yes. And so as I went through these hearings, with quite frankly, no one wishing me to do it, because quite frankly, the women's groups initially strongly opposed the legislation. They opposed it right from the beginning. The reason was, I would take focus off of gender issues and take focus off of issues relating to choice. But after a while, I want to publicly thank her. Every time I speak to violence against women, I thank her, Ellie Schmiel. Thanks to Ellie Schmiel, we gathered 13 women's organizations around my table in my conference room. And when I introduced this bill, and finally Ellie Schmiel said, what are we doing? Why aren't we supporting this? And since then, they've become the strongest supporters and enforcers, if you will, of this legislation. I wrote this legislation with my own hand. No one else participated in this. No one wanted to be involved in it initially. And I had a lot of great help from a great staff, a woman who teaches at the University of Wisconsin at law school, Victoria Nurse, did an incredible job in drafting this one. I ended up getting an awful lot of help from an awful lot of men and women. But here's the point of all this. When we got the bill passed in 1994 as part of the overall Biden crime bill, when I got it passed, I thought I had done a good job. I was, quite frankly, privately, in my heart, it's the thing I'm proudest of anything I've ever done in my public life. And I thought we really had settled this. And we began to make great progress. We've spent, by the way, in everything from training judges, to training police officers, to training intake officers in the family courts of the country. We've made great progress, and I'm proud of it. But what I found out was, I learned a lot of other things. We had to amend the law to make sure immigrant women. We found out that what was happening is, the ultimate prisoner is an immigrant woman being beaten by her husband or significant other, mostly her husband, knowing that if she reports the abuse, she would be deported and unlikely to be able to take her children with her.